But as she found this week, these things don't always go according to plan. If you're going to carry out major surgery on your government, you need to be sure the prognosis is good. It was a picture of health to begin with, a fresh new team at Party HQ, but before long, complications arose. Justine Greening, who's had a rocky time at education, decided she had had enough. She quit the government rather than accept a sideways move. While Jeremy Hunt refused to budge from his job at Health. He even left his meeting having added social care to his job title. There was a fresher look among the junior ministerial ranks. But when the new cabinet met on Tuesday morning, it looked, well, very much like the old one. Normally loyal Conservative grandee Nicholas Soames asked, "Is that it?" The state of the NHS then caused more pain. Dozens of senior doctors wrote to the Prime Minister saying conditions in some hospitals were becoming intolerable. Patients were dying prematurely.
We have now clearly reached the point where the NHS cannot meet the standards of care that we would, all of us in the NHS, ministers included, want to provide.
At Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn pressed on the bruise.
We know the Prime Minister recognises there's a crisis in our NHS because she wanted to sack the Health Secretary last week, but was too weak to do it.
Mr Corbyn announced his own reshuffle towards the end of the week, with a surprising return to the front bench for Clive Lewis, who has been cleared of sexual harassment claims. While two other Labour MPs, Kelvin Hopkins and Ivan Lewis, have been referred to an independent disciplinary panel over allegations of sexual misconduct. On Friday, US President Donald Trump raised the temperature, cancelling by tweet his visit to the UK next month to open the new American embassy, calling the decision to relocate the building to an off location a bad deal. His friends on this side of the pond suspected there were other reasons for his decision.
Just maybe Sadiq Khan, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party planning mass protests, maybe those optics he didn't like the look of.
Nigel Farage also set pulses racing with this.
I'm reaching the point of thinking that we should have a second referendum.
On what?
On EU membership.
The whole thing?
Yes, of course, of course.
The Conservatives hope focusing on the environment will bring the party back to health. The Prime Minister teamed up with our new eco-warrior Environment Secretary Michael Gove to crack down on the use of plastics.
We must reduce the demand for plastic, reduce the number of plastics in circulation and improve our recycling rates.
It all seems strangely reminiscent of someone who once said, "Vote blue, go green," in another tricky week that's left the PM still looking a little green around the gills. Now let's pick up on a story which broke overnight. The new Justice Secretary, David Gauke, is considering a judicial review into the decision to release the serial sex attacker John Worboys on parole. Earlier this month, the parole board announced that he would be released under strict licence conditions. He was jailed in 2009 for a minimum of 8 years of drugging and sexually assaulting 12 women. However, it is thought he might have carried out as many as 100 rapes and sexual assaults on women in London in the early 2000s. And I'll take this to the panel first. This is obviously a very emotive case that people get very worked up about. But the politics of the Justice Secretary, Tom Newton-Dunn, asking for a judicial review against a body which is really under the supervision of his own department, this gets a little odd.
Justice Secretary criticises Justice Department, shock. There's definitely a whiff of panic going on in the government now over this, and I think the David Gauke's decision is emblematic of that. The government have, for whatever different reason, found themselves on the wrong side of public opinion on this. An appalling mass serial rapist is about to be let out of prison this week, having served less than 10 years, for crimes, most of which he wasn't even prosecuted for. So the government are playing catch-up. They've had, what, 7, 8, 10 days to do this judicial review. David Gauke has only launched it because he's coming under pressure from other cabinet ministers. But I think you can diagnose it as a deeper problem here, and that's the entire Justice Department justice policy has really been in drift for up to 7 years, because the Tory government, that was the coalition government, can't really make up its mind between a liberal justice establishment where it concentrates on rehabilitation and less time in prison, and the more traditional Tory authoritarian lock them up and throw the key to a pin, which is the sort of consequences of today's decision. You've had 5 different justice secretaries in 5 years, from the original king of soft justice himself, Ken Clarke, then onto the authoritarian Chris Grayling, then onto the great reformer Michael Gove. Then we had a swift interlude with Liz Truss, who never really had time to set out her credentials, and now on to David Gauke. So perhaps it's no huge surprise that the system is now in a bit of a mess.
And if Tom is right that the government are playing catch-up a bit on John Worboys because there's been such a huge public outcry, nonetheless, is it still the right thing to do to try and keep him in prison?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it seems quite clear to me the parole board breached their own rules. The victims of somebody who is convicted of serious crimes have a right to make representations. We know that some of the victims whose cases were brought to, and again, he's not convicted as a serial rapist, unfortunately, because those cases weren't brought to court. And who made that decision? The Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, now Keir Starmer on the Labour front bench. The reality is, that these people were not allowed to make representations because they weren't even informed that he was going before the parole board. But I do think the other fundamental issue is actually a lot of what Tom was saying there, is that the Tory government is totally out of touch, as I think all of the establishment and all the party leaders are out of touch in terms of what ordinary people expect of our justice system. This whole ridiculous nonsense that someone is released halfway through a sentence. If you are sentenced to 10 years, 15 years, to whatever it is, you should be serving that full sentence, and maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 months off for good behaviour, or better still, more years on for bad behaviour. I think the British public think that our justice system at the current time is an absolute joke, and I think that because it is.
Well, you raise an interesting point in terms of what the public care about as opposed to what's possibly debated at Westminster most of the time. We're maybe guilty of this. We spent an enormous amount of last year talking about Brexit, to the exclusion of most other things. A few other political issues have raised their head this week, Steve, which are probably things people watching care a great deal more about. First and foremost, the NHS. That has been causing more than a few political problems for the government.
Oh, if Brexit wasn't swamping everything, this would be the overwhelming issue. And as you say, its voters are much more concerned about this than anything else, with good cause. And at some point, there will have to be a grown-up discussion about funding of the NHS and how we pay for it. And whether that will be possible in the current climate, I doubt. But I don't think it's entirely impossible, because I think the crisis will intensify, and in a way that I think has been overlooked in some respects, that 2017 election partly accepted miraculously in British politics that to get improvements in some services you have to pay for it. So maybe there will be a grown-up debate, but don't hold your breath. And in the meantime, it's going to be an issue that Theresa May will have to keep at least one eye on, as well as trying to negotiate the impossible with Brexit. So,
Julie, during that time, we've got the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions this week saying the NHS was the best prepared it had ever been. At the same time, we've got doctors saying
all the operations, yes.
Doctors saying that patients are dying prematurely. So, I mean, long-term solutions need to be discussed, but in the short-term, political damage?
Oh, absolutely. And the NHS is absolutely, the tanks are parked very much on, Labour territory there. I just don't think the general consensus in the country is that they trust the Tories on the NHS. And that is a really big issue for them. By the way, a lot of the NHS problems are actually down to the fact that a good thing, which is that we're getting older and we're living longer. And there are amazing treatments and operations and drugs that can keep us alive. We always see this as a problem. This is actually a wonderful miracle of modern science and medicine, and we should be grateful for this, such problems to have.
And of course, the big news of the week was supposed to be the government reshuffle, and we were going to get a government that looked more like the rest of the country. Tom, it turned out not quite to be as dramatic as some of us had maybe expected. Was it a government fail?
It was, well, depending how you define fail, they certainly failed. I mean, I think it's actually quite, it's taken a few days really for the penny to drop, although I had my suspicions on the night when some of the star 2015 intake sorts got no promotions at all. That was a bit of a telltale sign. So define success and fail. Was it a success in that it stormed to the top of all the billings for a brilliant masterstroke of reorganising her top team by Theresa May? No, not really, because she just rearranged the deck chairs on the deck of Titanic. So so some would have it. No new faces at all of note in the Cabinet at all. Caroline Noakes is attending Cabinet before she looks at me with a sort of dagger eyes any further, rather than a full Cabinet Minister. But did Theresa May manage to fend off the vultures coming for her by absolutely willfully, it now appears, failing to put key potential rivals into key positions, people like Rory Stewart, Dominic Raab, and some of the 2015ers, you know, talking, they get along and talk about Tom Tugendhat and Johnny Mercer. Yes, so it was, you know, hashtag fail publicly, but hashtag digging in privately.
Clever behind the scenes. Well, listening to all of that is my first guess.